Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Dan Howells, your host for the Performance Strategies and Stumbles podcast. And we're back again for part two with Spencer Goggin, where we dig into the stumbles element of his career to date. I'm really looking forward to sharing with you this episode. We dig into things like why a mohawk is just totally unprofessional and what types of mistakes we've made across our careers with regards to injuries or program design and so much more. So we'll head straight into the episode now and dig into the weeds around stumbles and what lessons can be learned from our mistakes. Welcome back, everybody, to part two of the Performance Strategies and Stumbles podcast. I've got Spencer Goggin again with me, who gave fantastic insight last week into strategies around his program design with divers. We're going to go a little bit more towards Spence as a practitioner now, looking back a little bit more on his career, I imagine. But we're going to dig deep into the stumbles and the mistakes that we do make as practitioners that often we probably don't share enough of, because there's a lesson within every mistake we make if we've got some self-awareness around it. So Spence, let's just go back then. I guess the start of your career is a really good place to reflect on potential mistakes. Is there anything from early in your career, any early mistakes you encountered that you look back on and think, okay, I could have done that differently? Could I offer that advice to somebody else now?
Yes. Oh, well, thanks for having me back, Dan, first of all. And there are a lot. So I started out very first internship at the club that I played for as an apprentice player growing up. So back at Worcester Warriors, who I think have unfortunately failed and fallen into some kind of financial strife at the moment. So but that meant coaching a lot of the guys that I'd played with when I went into becoming an intern. And that was really, really challenging. I fell into the trying to be liked versus actually just becoming a better strength and conditioning coach trap way too often. And I was very lucky to have a patient mentor. Lee Douglas, I think, is at Hartpury now. He was
Lee's a great guy.
Yeah. He was very patient with me and taught me a lot of lessons. It gave me a lot of opportunity to figure out what it actually meant to be a professional S&C coach. It took me quite a long time to figure out what professional means as well. Taking yourself a bit more seriously as a person.
Can you share some of the frown moments, the moments you look back on and cringe?
There's one that sticks out head and shoulders above the rest. So I was at uni at the time as well, and as part of the uni varsity game, you had to dye. You remember the Romanian team dyed their hair blonde for some World
bleached.
Cup?
Yeah.
So I thought it'd be a good idea to join in with the rest of the lads on that, and then so we played the game, or we were about to play the game. I had to roll in and do my internship the day before, and had a bright blonde mohawk. Safe to say, I didn't go down too well, and I did not get to finish the day because one of the academy managers basically told me to not come back until I'd shaved my head. So that was the first time I had a buzz cut at 19 or something, and that was a moment for me where I was like, all right, I can't have that uni life and try and do this. There has to be some better balance here, and
or at least I mean, those are so close, those circles. It's rugby with rugby, right? I guess you could still do that in separate sports. Let's dig into the fact that you've got your peers or friends as your athletes, and you've mentioned they're slipping into not necessarily unprofessional approaches, but I guess you've flexed to accommodate friends in that situation. What did that look like? Did it manifest as banter? Did it manifest as like letting them do what they wanted to do?
Yeah. They were pretty good, actually. They knew that I was trying to grow as a coach, and the lines were a bit blurred. But it just that the level of respect that you naturally have for a coach as an athlete wasn't quite there. And through the situation and circumstances that weren't really my fault, but it was just more sessions would turn into banter, and we'd get distracted, and the intensity would fall away. And now being able to sit where I am now and look back at that coach that was going around then, I see it happened quite a lot for young coaches still, where they meet with athletes and this might be their first or second job, and the athlete has a profile and you want to connect with that person, but they just want you to do your job, like just deliver as a coach, and then we'll become friends at the end of it. I'm sure if you can do this, then that bit happens naturally.
The athletes that are going to be successful, have the best opportunity for success, don't want you to make it easy for them just to accommodate it being easy, you know. And you and I have done some mentorship together, and you end up talking about this difference between being liked and being respected. Because I'm sure in that situation, for some people, yeah, I like the way Spencer's being with me as a young coach, and he's making it enjoyable and easy, but I don't respect the fact that this training is not hard. It's not challenging me. Whereas on the flip, if they can respect the way you drive their training and like you, that's going to be the sort of that's what success looks like, I think, for a coach. And it's tough for a young coach to do. Have you got any advice for young coaches who are in that position in terms of trying to set those boundaries for themselves?
Yeah, some of the best young coaches that I've been fortunate to work with, they just know their shit. So I'm sorry for the profanity on this podcast, but they're normally like either powerlifting athletes, or they've had a really inherent interest in bodybuilding or whatever, some kind of strength training or conditioning activity as their sport. And when they come through, their ability to translate or get that information across to the athletic group that they're working with adds that layer of credibility that means that more senior athletes, even though you're a young coach, go, oh, this guy knows, or this girl knows what they're on about here. So I'm already going to gravitate towards liking them. I think just knowing the technical, knowing the X's and O's, knowing your physiology, even if it's really basic, and being able to be verbose in that helps deliver you, even as a young coach.
Yeah, and I think that's probably it's a great example of where people might make mistakes, in the sense that they make a decision to program in a certain way or set up a certain drill or exercise and haven't thought about the why, and they get found out. And actually, you should be really preparing quite diligently. And yet, like those individuals you talk about, lucky for them, have gone through maybe the experience of being an athlete, and they've been on the receiving end. They know what intensity means. They know what the right rest means. They know what speed looks like, etc. And for those that are listening that maybe don't have that high experience of maybe being on the receiving end as an athlete, you've got to put yourself under the bar, I say. You've got to put yourself through these experiences that you're asking your athletes to do. So you've got an ability to relate to that intensity of work, and you have a why behind everything you do. That's really cool. So coming in through the latter part of your career at any point, what other mistakes have you made along the journey there?
So it's this evolution of you start to know your stuff. So you get some firm beliefs as a coach, and then you move on to another environment and you take those beliefs with you and fall into the trap of trying to just pick up what you had here and go, well, that worked there. This is a similar environment where I'm delivering, changing the same, strength, whatever. This is how I develop strength here. So this is how I'll do it here.
Yeah.
And when it doesn't work and you don't manage conflict well, it erodes any belief that anyone else has in that set of principles that you've brought with you from your previous role. So that's something that my years now as a coach, the last couple I've worked really hard on is how to, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together, right? So how do you bring people on board with the message that you're trying to deliver, athletes, coaches, front office, whoever it is, and then pull people along with you slower, but more collaborative.
Can you bring that to life? Obviously, without naming names or teams, but what was the environment? Was it a rugby into a different sport or union to league? But then, what did that look like on the ground? What was the impact of it? Give some listeners some ideas of some of the friction it might have created in that environment for you.
Yeah, sure. So I won't be too specific, but what I would say is we've got me with a strong set of beliefs, and then another member of the performance team with a similar set of experiences, different sports, more medically driven versus strength conditioning, performance driven. And when they didn't align, rather than both parties sitting down and going, okay, rather than me versus you, and one of us being right, it's going to be us versus the problem. I fell into the trap of feeling as if I had to come out of these meetings and conversations being right versus what's best for the athlete. And so as soon as I could put my ego to one side, perhaps, and look at this more objectively rather than having an emotional reaction to being perceived as wrong, the whole relationship blossomed. And now it's great, right? Now it's in a really, really good place. But that initial 6 months was quite challenging for me to be able to take some of my ego out of the conversation, I guess.
Yeah. And again, getting into the weeds of what that looks like for people to maybe raise their self-awareness as listeners is, did that look like, was it non-verbal behavior that you would just, you became grumpy and intolerant to work with? Or was it that your words were challenging? Like, why are we not doing this? Or I don't agree with you. How direct were you? What was it specifically that
it was
your ego brought out of you?
Yeah. That's a great question. It was probably non-verbal. And then when we were in communication, I'd be really blunt, like monosyllabic, which was obviously, but I'm not hiding any. I can be quite emotional. They sit just beneath the surface sometimes, especially if I start to get frustrated. And that's something I'm now aware of and have to physically work on to make sure it doesn't get that way. But part of the advice that I got was, when you're having these discussions, rather than sitting around a table, kind of interview, just go for a walk, change the environment, and see if that changes the feel of your conversation. Even just doing that 2 or 3 times at the start, went, gee, this is so different straight away.
Yeah, clearly you've had some feedback there then, and some advice. Was that sought after advice, or was that, hey man, I need to help you out here before this gets out of hand?
No, I went looking for it, because there were a couple of meetings and incidents, I guess incidents is a bit strong, but a couple of meetings where I left and I'd sit at my desk, or I'd go and get a bit of fresh air and go, oh, this isn't me. And well, it is me, but this isn't how I want to behave in these situations. So what's coming up for me? So I've got a couple of both internal and external bits of feedback. The feedback was very similar. And they both know me. So
was that tough to deal with? Like, because maybe if we look at this retrospectively, you could say, the problem was you without you realizing it, and you've really had a heightened awareness to this. But was that tough to deal with in the moment? Did you argue against that in your head?
Maybe subconsciously for a bit, but I think it's part of becoming a little bit older. You start to be a bit more reflective in what you do and how you look at who you are. So it just fit with some of the stuff that I'd done in my little break from sport that I'd had post initial stint with the Western Force. I'd done some work there, and then when I saw these behaviors come up again, I was like, okay, I know what I need to do now. I've got to go and just get a bit of feedback and sit and think and have a lot of purpose behind, when I go into this meeting, this is how I'd like to behave, reflect on it, do it again until it became a natural cycle. And happily, it's part of who I am now, which is great.
Awesome. Yeah, I think there's a huge element to this through your career. Like you say, as you get older and wiser and a little bit more reflective, and you can probably control your emotions a little bit better, it becomes easier to deal with these things. I think the one thing that I'm hearing is the impact of, say, even just non-verbal behavior on any situation that you're trying to collaborate and work with people. And that's something to really be aware of. But also the seeking, not validation is the wrong word, but confirmation or not as to what you're feeling, openly asking in a vulnerable sense, what am I manifesting here? Am I coming across badly? What are your thoughts? And doing that with confidence to not worry about the response you get. You're asking because you want to improve, so that's really cool. In terms of programming mistakes, we've talked here mostly about people so far. Let's dig into the technical side. Is there anything that stands out for you in your career where you've stumbled in program design? There's been a negative outcome. What has that looked out like, and what have you learned from it?
I think I was probably being guilty of perhaps being a bit conservative previously. The availability statistic is heavily pushed, and we need players available. Well, Yep, the best way to be available is to do nothing.
Yes.
If you just sat on the sofa all week, you'd be available for 100% of training. Would you be any good? Probably not. But I was guided quite heavily by this availability driver. And at times of the year, absolutely, that is your number one. But at other times of the year, you've got to find where your edges are a little bit. And I'm not saying be a cowboy, because it's a calculated safe fail experiment, let's call it. So if the worst case scenario is people pull up a bit sore for a few more days than you thought, chances I might listen to this podcast in 12 months time, have that same approach, and then do 3 calf muscles in a week or somewhere, and then it becomes a problem. But at the moment, and with the group that I'm working with at the Sharks, we're in a very hard block. We've gone to 140% straight line MAS this week, which is big, and three sets of 10 on, 10 off, 12 efforts. So
Wow.
they've had a hard week. We've had lads cover nearly 1900 meters of above 5 meters per second during that session. Really, really big exposure. But touching wood, it's all going to plan at the moment. We've got a little bit more to get through, but this more aggressive approach has definitely there's worth there.
Yeah, nice. So the mistake there is being too conservative and achieving nothing by the sounds of it, and actually them being unavailable, I imagine, at that point anyway. It brings up, I'll share where I can as well here. The point you bring up actually reminds me of a mistake I made. Only in the last, when I worked with the sevens for GB up to Japan a few years ago, and we've got to be really aware as practitioners about the evolution of our practices. Once we recognize the new upper limit, so you've just recognized this new upper limit potentially for your rugby league boys. That's amazing, but it's also one thing we need to be right. Okay, that's my new norm, but what is the impact of that potential new norm acutely, but also chronically? And I remember getting the rugby sevens boys to the same kind of approach, and then I went and gave them some independent training. We would train for 3 or 4 days in a camp, and then we would go home for 3 or 4 days and they'd train independently. And I remember getting them to a point and prescribing them something like 3 times 12, 15 on, 15 off, which is high. But they'd got themselves to such a level of fitness that they were doing, like you say, 2 to 2.4K of high speed running in that session. And then I'd have 2 or 3 Solaises within the next 7 to 10 days. And I was like, okay, that's that difference between safe upper limits and, where it's counterproductive. So it's amazing you bring that up, because I that's one of my mistakes is structuring something like straight line MAS to such a high extent that we've probably impacted the sort of effects of the next 7 to 10 days. And what would I do differently moving forward? I would introduce some more rugby specific work, so we're covering less distance. So it might be that every other rep is orientated with down ups, between the 22 meter shuttle. So we're controlling some of that high speed work and upping some of our excel and decel work. But that's cool. Yeah, you got to get, it's a sweet spot, right? An inverted U, where conservation is of no good, but also oversaturating is also equally destructive. So that's cool. What about in terms of session organization, exercise selection? Have you been guilty of this? I see a schematic or a template, I'm going to use that, and there's been any negative implications with your athletes?
I probably went to some of the Franz Boschi, hip blocky type stuff a bit early. I still use it, but with a much better understanding of why it's being used and where it fits in the program. I was perhaps guilty of using it as a primary training stimulus previously, when it's not that. That's not the purpose of it, in my opinion. And that would fall into that same point that I mentioned before of being perhaps a little bit conservative, and not getting enough load.
Did you perceive it as being the stimulus, and therefore you were conservative without realizing you were being conservative?
Yeah, probably. I think
Yeah.
that's the most succinct way to put that together. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
You see it as a training stimulus that's creating an adaptive response as opposed to maybe a coordinative response, which is probably what it's more orientated towards.
yeah.
Let's look at in that in detail then. Did that look like, okay, I've seen some videos or Fran's has been here to do a fantastic CPD event. And then the next time you go and write a program, it's in there before you've done it yourself. Did that happen? Or did you self-experiment?
He had a DVD out ages ago.
Yeah. For
When
those
people
that
used to
don't know
buy
what DVDs are, you're gonna have to Google
yeah.
that. But so, yeah,
And
your
I
our
must
early CPD was DVD orientated.
yeah, I must have been. I was at the school. I was at Magdalen College School in Oxford when I bought the DVD, and I'm desperately trying to find it again as well. It must be
Oh,
somewhere because it's
nice.
awesome.
A
It's
relic,
great.
yeah.
Yeah, but I got really excited by it, and then it was in the athletics program, and then it was in PE, and then it was in the rugby program, and I was just like,
Yeah.
threw it all in there at once. And then it came out because I didn't really understand it, and I didn't really tinker with it either or try it out myself. I just threw it out there. When I got to the force the second time round, there was a guy there
Yeah.
called.
One question on that school
Oh, go on
situation.
then.
If you've thrown it into everything, did you love it until somebody said, "Why are we doing this?" Did people ask you and
They,
challenge you in that environment?
yeah, I loved it still, just because the kids
Yeah,
really got around it. Because even the coordinated ones, when you put some of the harder drills in there,
yeah.
it all fell
Challenge.
apart. So from a challenge and fail and safe fail and all these kind of that, it had a really powerful learning impact. But did I know that the exercises were sequentially increasing in complexity or ground reaction force? No, I just threw the exercises in there because I liked how they looked and I thought they'd do what I had an idea, but not a rational idea. It was
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
chaotic. Yeah.
Cool. So I cut you off then. So then you talked about moving into rugby with it.
Yeah, I went back to the force for the second time, and then a coach there called Anthony Katrupi had done some work with some of the Franz Bosch systems as well, and we put together as I've just described, a framework of progression from low complexity, low complexity, low ground reaction force through to higher. And he was great. He really steered the ship on that and taught me a lot. And
What was the difference there for you, for him educating you and guiding you? Was it clarity on the why and the clarity on the transfer, clarity on the impact of that modality?
Yeah, there was clarity on the mechanism for change when you apply the stimulus. And then what, in my mind, when I understood that in more detail, I could then organize exercises to fit that change in mechanics or change in how your pelvis operates when you move at high speed. Pretty much was the foundation concept. And since then, I've tried to work away from pelvis and go down towards the feet and how they how is your foot interacting with the ground, and see if that helps educate up the chain rather than down the chain. So that's where my head's at the moment. But there's, again, like, there's a lot more clarity of thought as to why they're in there rather than just throwing exercises out there and seeing what comes up.
Yeah. What about, injuries? We don't like to admit injuries have happened on our watch, and that maybe a result of maybe some of the decisions we've made. Has that ever happened to you? Like, in the gym, on the field?
Yeah. One really sticks out that it's so hard, right? Because we encourage mistakes as coaches, but I said this exact sentence to the athlete in question. I said, like, sometimes our mistakes affect your athletic career. I was rehabbing someone who had a fifth met fracture and didn't respect or perhaps fully understand the loading requirements of bone healing. And whilst we'd hit some KPIs around speed and change of direction and high speed running volumes and things like that, I don't know if I'd done enough, or I know now that I hadn't done enough specific plyometric work to stimulate the requirement for bone growth. And re 2 weeks back into training, as soon as the load started to pick up, and re-injury, and then
So
Luckily,
you rehab in that sense was more outcome driven as opposed to like, let's get these numbers, let's get these distances, let's do these 20 Excel details, you're good to go.
yeah,
And that would have been probably no different to a person with a groin injury, which is a different anatomical injury and a different tissue response approach.
yeah,
Is that, yeah, okay, cool, nice.
yeah. I was lucky that when it happened, we went for coffee, and I basically said, "Oh, I'm sorry, like that's my bad, but it's your
Did he
career."
think it was your bad? Did he see it that way until you said?
I don't think it wasn't. It wasn't like he definitely knew we'd made a mistake because he re-injured. So players know, right?
Yeah.
But as long as I thought, as long as I'm honest with him and say that, yes, we have. This is what we want to do next time round. This is the change in the plan. What do you think? And bring it on board. It definitely made that meeting with it felt more positive than if we'd just gone, that was, why did that happen? Everyone's looking at each other like the Spider-Man meme, pointing fingers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And look, it happens on all our watches. I'll probably share numerous examples with different guests, but one that I just remember once just popped in my mind now about a hamstring injury that had happened that was just probably a load orientated thing that it was a complex set of reasons, but in the rehab process, I distinctly remember the environment I worked in was a little bit frustrating because people, when they got the day off, they love to have the day off, right? And that's fine, but there was no decision making that was best for the athlete in that sense. And I was like, we should spread this load out. I know it's a day off, but we need to probably expose this individual. And do we think he can do it independently? Do we think we need to be here at the training center? And ultimately, I yielded to the fact that like we would get it in the day before off the back of not having the rest day that was planned. So we went load as opposed to load rest load, and that actual loading scheme should have been on the day off. So we brought it forward. We can just and they got a little mini retweak, and I was just like, at the moment I was like, I know what I've done there. I've just hoped and hoped that the pressure I've had to put on me to we'll put it here, it'll be fine. And I knew in my heart of hearts at that point that it was not the right decision for the athlete. And it put them back 2 weeks. I think the most important thing here is that what we learn from them, these mistakes, right? And that we're updating our actions and behaviors and our decisions based on these small mistakes. They're not negligent in any way. They're accidents, I like to call them, as opposed to mistakes in that sense. Right, that's really, really cool. Look, I think I want to say thank you so much for being vulnerable here and sharing your stumbles for everyone to understand that we're all human beings and these things happen, but actually everything you've talked about there has been clearly pivotal in influencing your career and the future decisions you make. And I think that's the bigger message with episodes like this, is to help the listeners understand that it's okay to have accidents, make mistakes, but it's what we learn from them that really define us moving forward. So look, from me to you and on behalf of the listeners, thanks so much for sharing in that kind of open and honest and vulnerable sense, buddy. Thank you.
No problems, Dan. Thanks again for having me on. Yeah, really enjoyed it.
So that's it. That's our first Stumbles episode complete, our first series with our first guest complete. Thanks so much to Spencer for stepping up to the plate, and I really hope that you like this interesting new format which looks at both strategies but also mistakes, stumbles, and what we can learn from it and what you can learn from it as practitioners as well. Next week we welcome John Noonan, who's going to be talking around race preparation and race day strategies for motorsport drivers before we visit his stumbles the following week. So tune in, and I hope you enjoy the listen.